The costumes in that movie were so freaking beautiful. I recently watched the new Frankenstein movie that just came out. Guillermo del Toro with Mia Goth and Jacob Elordi. Kate Hawley did such an amazing job. I just, I really want to make something from that film. I decided on this bonnet from the scene where Mia Goth's character Elizabeth and the creature meet for the first time. I've been in a bit of a sewing funk the past year or so. I haven't been very inspired to sew, and after watching that movie, it's like lit a fire inside me again, and I just have to sew something. And this bonnet is going to be entirely hand sewn, so I'm not going to be using any machines. All right, Shayla, let's make a bonnet. Rock-a-bye Shayla in the treetop. When the wind blows, the Shayla will rock. Since I've never made my own bonnet from scratch before, I went to Pinterest for some references. I looked at a lot of photos of 1850s and 1860s bonnets to come up with this, and ended up with something that I was very happy with. So I used a very thick paper to cut out the pattern pieces, and for the bonnet itself I used cotton buckram as a base, which is a very common fabric used in millinery work to make hats. It's nice and stiff and it keeps its shape. And so I laid out the pattern pieces onto the buckram. I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance that I'll use to attach all the pattern pieces together. For the fashion fabric, I used this taffeta that I had laying around. I feel like it's not as vibrant as the taffeta that was used in the movie, but it's what I had, and I was trying to use fabrics that I already had from previous projects to help save. So a lot of this fabric was already cut into, so I had to really maneuver the pattern pieces around on there to make sure that I got the most out of my fabric. So once I got all the buckram cut out and all the fabric, I got my circle piece, pattern piece, and I attached some wire to it. You could use millinery wire, but I just used a 16 gauge wire, and I wrapped the ends in tape to help prevent it from poking through the fabric once it's all finished. This is going to help the bonnet keep its shape. I then stitched the ends of this pattern piece together and before that, I put notches on the seam allowance, that way it curves to the circle more. So see here, I attached the back piece to the center piece, and then I stitched on the brim. See the inside, I also cut triangles into the seam allowance for this to help it spread out so it can bend better. I need to whip stitch the wire to the brim to secure it, and I also need some wire going around these edges here because it's folding. I have been using a lot of tape to secure the wire in place before I whip stitch it down. And once all the wire is whip stitched in place, I have a nice, secure, sturdy bonnet structure. So now I can begin the tedious task of sewing on the fabric. Yay! I found thread that matched the fabric's color really well. I wanted to make sure the fabric went on really smoothly, so I pinned it down in place, and then I used a running stitch to stitch that down, which will be covered. I folded over the next pattern piece to hold the raw edge, and I placed that over top. I made sure to cut on any of the curves to help the fabric move and mold to the frame as easily as possible, and I pinned everything in place so it would stay nice and tight and smooth around the bonnet. And the edges are eventually going to be covered in bias tape, so that'll be nice and covered up. Also, again, folded those edges down to hide the raw edge and pinned everything securely in place to make it as smooth as possible. Then I started sewing. I did somewhat of a running stitch. Okay, so here's the thing. What I think I'm going to do is I'm also going to place the inside fabrics here, and I can maybe kill two birds with one stone and have the inner fabric lining already placed, and as I sew the outer fabric down, I will also sew into the inner lining, and I don't have to go back in and re-sew everything again. It just might be a little bit looser, but I don't care. as much about what it looks like on the inside because this part will all be hidden by my head. I just want it covered with the fabric at least. Okay, this project is really hard because this fabric is so dark and it's hard to see, but I'm basically putting these tabs underneath, and then I'm pulling the pins from on the other side back a little bit and pushing them back through the 2 layers of fabric on the inside too. So it's getting all of the layers of fabric from the outside and the inside down, and I'm gonna try to stitch it that way I get it all done. I wish I had enough fabric to make little like pleats all around the inside, but I didn't have enough extra fabric to do that, so it's just gonna be flat. But I'm gonna put a ton of velvet flowers on the inner brim. Oh my goodness. And basically I'm gonna do the same thing that I did for this, is I'm gonna have both pieces of fabric pinned to like the inside and the outside. So I'll have this here, and then I'll sew it all so I can just get it done quicker. And I'll sew it all in one, like through the thread going through all the layers. It's gonna take forever, but I'm basically putting the needle through this end, popping it back out on this end, doing shorter stitches on this side so they're more or less visible, and then on this side I don't care as much, and so in order to move quicker, I'll make them about like just under 1/4 of an inch. If I had more fabric, I could cut it on the bias, but I just cut these 1-inch strips on the straight grain, and I'm going to use that as the bias tape to wrap around the edge. I'm going to like turn it in 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch on each sides, and then fold that in half. I'm essentially folding over this edge 1/4 of an inch, but I'm just holding it between my 2 fingers and moving up along the whole of the tape and pressing it down that way. So once the bias tape was folded and all ready to go, I attached that to the brim and I pinned it in place. I didn't even weave it through, I just popped the pins right in place and prayed. Okay, so I cut out this rectangle for the bavalet. It's going to be the ruffled bit that's in the back of the bonnet. My piece is about like 17 inches long by like 3.5. But you could make yours longer or wider. I honestly, this is the amount of fabric I had left for this. All right, we're like nearing the end here. I also need to add some ties. So I have these really long strips of rectangles. They're similar dimensions to the bavalet, except I made them much longer. And I'm just gonna gather them. I gathered them about like 1/2 an inch from the edge. And then I sewed them onto the bottom edge tip of the bonnet and made this cute little ruffle tie. And then I finally started attaching the bavalet, and I just kind of haphazardly made these little pleats for the fabric that I had, and over top I wanted a little bit extra. I don't know if the original bonnet in the movie had lace, but I wanted to add some lace. I had this pretty black lace and I thought it would go really nicely. I also took another look at the bonnet in the film, and it looks like they have 4-leaved pansy looking flowers on the inside of the brim made out of velvet. So I had some velvet that is almost the same color, and I cut out these 4 little bumps basically, and then gathered them at the bottom, and they made this little 4-leaf pansy type flower made out of velvet. I made so many of them, and I'll just cover the entire inside of the brim with them. I think I made about like 52 total, and I started attaching, and I thought it was going to take forever, but it went by a lot faster than I thought. And once that was done, the bonnet was complete. I had to buy some green silk chiffon fabric for the veil. I was a little scared it wasn't the right color, but it worked out perfect. She made it look so graceful in the movie. Come on. You see how to tie a bonnet is you tie it. Kate Hawley has made me realize that I need bonnets in my life. So this is just the beginning of my bonnet making era. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.